Both men vied for Haley's attention, each hoping to win her heart. In the end, she chose Taylor. He was serious, driven, and focused, while Alan, though charming, lacked the same level of commitment. Haley had already started thinking about her future, seeking a relationship that was stable and serious. Their bond deepened quickly, and they were married soon after. 7 years later, their daughter had just celebrated her 7th birthday. The early years of their marriage had been happy, but slowly, Haley began to voice her dissatisfaction. She often compared Taylor to the husbands of her friends who hadn't yet had children. She grew tired of hearing about how those men spoiled their wives with gifts and took them on frequent seaside vacations. To her, her own life seemed dull and monotonous. Her job, their small house, and caring for their child. She started to feel frustrated with her routine. At work, she was unfulfilled, and everything about her life began to feel dreary. Her discontent grew, and she began to criticize Taylor for not achieving more in his career. She often pointed out the successes of her friends' husbands, who had started thriving businesses. Taylor, worn out by his wife's constant complaints, finally snapped. They had a heated argument that evening. A few days later, Taylor was at work when his phone rang. It was Alan, a former classmate with whom he rarely spoke. "Hey, Taylor, long time no see." Alan greeted him, sounding cheerful. After a brief chat, Alan got to the point. "Listen, my birthday is next Friday, and I'd love to have you and Haley over. There will be lots of guests, and it should be a fun time." Taylor, eager for a change of pace, agreed right away. He thought it would be a good opportunity for both him and Haley to relax, as they hadn't spent much time together recently. Perhaps that was the reason for her moodiness. When Taylor mentioned Alan's invitation to Haley, he was taken aback by her response. Instead of her usual cynicism, she smiled and agreed to go. Taylor felt a sense of relief, thinking maybe she just needed something different. They decided to leave their daughter with her grandmother for the evening. On Friday night, they arrived at Alan's house, which had recently undergone impressive renovations. The large living area was filled with people, and many familiar faces from their school years were present. Everyone congratulated Alan on his birthday and asked about his professional achievements. It seemed everything was going well for him. As the evening unfolded, Taylor became deeply engaged in conversation with several of the guests. Meanwhile, Haley focused on Alan, captivated by his success. She found herself quietly admiring how well things had turned out for him. As the alcohol flowed, Taylor, who rarely drank, became intoxicated. He had consumed much more than usual and was feeling the effects. Not wanting to draw attention to himself, he quietly stepped into another room and lay down on the couch to rest. The party carried on, and Haley stayed by Alan's side. He shared stories of his life, and Haley couldn't help but wonder why things hadn't worked out for them when they were younger. "I still don't understand why we didn't work out back then," she said, her voice thoughtful, her gaze holding significance. By this point, the guests had been drinking for a while, and Alan took her words as something more than casual conversation. He didn't hesitate and quickly led her to his bedroom. Old feelings resurfaced, and they shared a passionate kiss. In that moment, Haley felt no regret or guilt. She could almost envision herself living the lavish life Alan had described. Everything seemed to unfold around them as the loud cheers of the guests echoed in the next room. For the first time, Haley strayed from her husband, and it was with a close friend. Later, Taylor awoke, startled by the sounds of laughter and celebration coming from the party. Glancing at the clock, he realized it was time to head home. He made his way into the living room, where the group was still gathered. He found Haley sitting quietly with a drink, her gaze distant and thoughtful. He didn't dwell on it at first, as he was still groggy from his nap and had a pounding headache. After exchanging goodbyes with everyone, they took a cab home. Taylor fell asleep almost immediately when his head hit the pillow, while Haley stayed up, lingering in the kitchen for a long time before finally heading to bed. A month passed since that night. Haley spoke less and less to Taylor, spending more time with her friends and behaving suspiciously. When the tension in the house became too much, Taylor confronted her. That's when he heard something he hadn't expected. She exploded with frustration, expressing everything that had been building up inside her. She was unhappy with their lifestyle, their home, And most painfully, she no longer found him attractive. "Who do you find attractive, then?" Taylor asked. "Alan," she replied without hesitation. In that moment, the truth couldn't be ignored anymore. Haley confessed that she was tired of her life with Taylor and was eager to start fresh with Alan. She left him that same night. Their daughter was already asleep, so Taylor kept his voice steady as he spoke about her future. She brushed him off, saying they'd figure out later, and began gathering her things. Later that evening, Haley called Alan to discuss their future, but once the conversation ended, he began ignoring her calls. During this time, Taylor filed for divorce. Haley saw their daughter only once and showed no regret. She didn't even attempt to fight for custody of her child. Alan, it seemed, wasn't ready for fatherhood. As for Taylor, he would never allow his daughter to grow up with a stranger, so he lived alone with her. Though it was tough to answer her questions about her mother, she eventually began to understand everything on her own. Haley, meanwhile, dove into a new life with Alan, thinking she'd found happiness. But it didn't last. Alan wasn't ready for a committed relationship and was always looking for ways to have fun without the burden of responsibilities. Over time, Haley started comparing to Taylor and realized that, despite everything, Taylor hadn't been as bad as she once thought. After 6 months, she ended her relationship with Alan and began reaching out to her ex-husband. During their meetings with their daughter, she tried to evoke sympathy by suggesting family outings or dinners. When their daughter would run off to her room, leaving the two of them alone, Haley made attempts to reconnect. Taylor finally had enough. He asked her to stop trying to interfere with his life. She could visit their daughter, but he didn't want her messing with his life or peace of mind any longer. He made it clear there would be no reconciliation. Haley, in pursuit of a dream life that never came to fruition, threw herself into new passions and fleeting connections. But as often happens, such fragile relationships quickly crumbled. Regaining trust from loved ones, however, was impossible. In the end, everyone received what they deserved.